Okay, hello everybody and welcome to our next panel session. I'm really excited to be here, not least it's my first time during the 2 days of being on the Accelerate stage, so it's great to be in this room with all of you. We're going to be talking about all things to do with data, and the title of this session is Unlocking an Improved Experience of Government Services with Data. And I think data has come up in absolutely every session that I have chaired over the last 2 days. So it's obviously incredibly important. We have another brilliant and international panel with us here. I'm going to quickly introduce our 5 speakers. I will be asking them each a couple of questions. But then, as we have done for the whole of Innovation, I'm going to be throwing it over to you, the audience, for as much of the session as we can. The audiences, you've all been brilliant throughout Innovation, so I'm hoping that we keep that energy going right up until the very last session. So from now, please be thinking about any questions and comments you would like to put to our speakers. But we have with us here on this session, we've got Barry Lowry, who is CIO at the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform in Ireland. So I've just been with John McCarthy on the other stage from Ireland as well, so great to have you with us, Barry. Then we've got Art Velsberg, who is Chief Government Data Officer of Estonia, so really good. And we know Estonia is really, really good on all things digital and data, so high expectations, Art, from what you will be sharing with us. Then we've got Jenny Brooker, who is Chief Data Architect at the UK here. So, Jenny, do you now sit in DSIT as well, or are you?
Yeah, part of GDS now.
Yeah. Part of GDS, and we have Fiona James, who is the Chief Data Officer and Director for Data Growth and Operations at the ONS here in the UK. And last but by no means least, we've got Lee Almond, who is Vice President, Chief Data Officer for one of our partners here today, CGI. So really wonderful to have you all with us here today. And as I said, data has come up in every session that we've been talking about, whether it's kind of AI, skills, innovation, transformation, all of those issues. So my first opening question to all of you is, why do we keep talking about data when we're talking about innovation and transformation? And can you give us any tangible examples of where good data management has really helped to improve something, whether it's kind of processes, transformation, or service delivery? Barry, I'm going to come to you first.
Okay, thanks. Well, I suppose the answer to the first question's obvious to any civil servant, and that is that we all want to deliver better services, and digital is a channel by which we can deliver better services. But unfortunately, we can't deliver services digitally to people if we don't know who they are and what they want. And so the exchange of data is absolutely essential to learn important things about people that are relevant to the services that we are providing them or they need us to help them with. In Ireland, I think one of the really good things that the government did very early on was identify that we needed to build very firm foundations to how we wanted to use data going forward. So in 2016, we began to work out a conceptual act, which became the Data Sharing and Governance Act, which was passed by our Parliament in 2019. But what that enables is for our minister to both approve data sharing across government and instruct data sharing across government. That's been the basis of our digital wallet in Ireland. And it basically means that in my division, the Office of the Government Chief Information Officer, we can produce credentials for people by going and getting the data via APIs to show that they've a qualification or they can drive or whatever it happens to be. And that's all been enabled by that act and a very forward-thinking approach to data sharing from the government. So that's
and having that kind of wallet and all of those digital credentials, making it much smoother for the citizen to engage with the government.
The public love it. I mean, the last 2 OECD surveys have said that Ireland is the most trusted country in the OECD with use of public data.
Okay.
And it's because they understand what the government's doing and they like it.
Fab. I might come on to some of the challenges and the barriers to data sharing, and trust maybe might be another issue that we explore in a bit more detail as we go along. Ott, Estonia, as I say, very digital country. You've been doing this for a long time. Again, why is data so important? And what example, you've got many, I think, you can draw on, but how data is being used effectively to drive service improvements?
Yeah. So the first thing is we are looking at from an economic perspective as well. So when you look at companies that are, or organizations that are utilizing data, then on average during the last 2 years, they have grown their revenue 16%.
Wow.
So when you compare that to organizations that are not data intensive, unfortunately, you know the situation in Europe. Economy is not doing well. So first of all, we see organizations that invest in data, they have the roles, specialists, they are more successful. Study after study has shown doing data-driven decisions, an organization is more effective. And this overall contributes to better services which are utilized by the people. When you talk about the economic impact, added value close to 5.7 billion euros, and it's growing. So there's an economic perspective. When now talking about the government, it's really about user-customer experience. So what we have done in the government when you talk about the data, imagine simple things such as your tax declaration. Every year in February, March, Estonians need to declare their taxes. It takes a couple of minutes. And the basis of that is data governance, but also data exchange with financial institutions and other stakeholders. I don't need to do literally anything. It takes me 2 minutes to declare my taxes. I just control everything, yes. So there is the citizen part. You need to ensure that the data that the government has is still correct, valid, and so forth. Or even simple things such as if a relative of yours dies, you don't need to go with different forms, papers, or you don't need to fill in electronic forms that someone close to you has died. That's taken care of for you automatically. So that's the basis of data. We oftentimes forgot, but everything that has to do with service delivery is based on data. So that's the foundational part, if we leave out the infrastructure and everything else.
Thanks. And like Ireland, is Estonia trusted? Like, do the public trust Estonia with their data?
So actually this year's survey results show that over 95% of Estonians trust the government when it comes to data processing and handling of data. So that's a huge trust towards the government. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about the private sector, which 1/3 of Estonians don't trust when it comes to handling of data. And this, again, when we were looking in, how many of those citizens have decided to not use a private or public sector provided services, then for the government, it's few percent. But for the private sector, it's 1/5
Wow.
of people have decided not to use private sector provided services because they don't actually know what's happening.
Yeah.
And they don't have any transparency. When you look at data privacy kind of rules, how we are processing, it's oftentimes really general. You cannot read out how they are actually processing, what are my rights, and the list goes on.
Thanks. So Jenny, your thoughts on kind of why data is so important. Are we doing it well? You know, are there things we could be doing better across the UK government? Because you have this kind of central oversight view as well.
Yeah, well, all of the kind of reasons we've just said, but we think a lot now in GDS about personalization of citizen services, like how do we start to meet the expectations that citizens have, that actually, like, we are already joining up all of these things. It's interesting you talk about trust, but actually when we've done a recent public attitudes survey, people's expectation is that we already do share their data, and they're quite bewildered at why we wouldn't share that so that they have a better kind of experience. But I guess back to the kind of the reasons for data becoming so important, but actually in the UK, we've never really had that narrative. Well, not since the kind of Tim Berners-Lee open data kind of movement, where like all of our like ministers and they're all talking about data. They're all talking about the importance of data alongside things like AI and other things. So that there is definitely a kind of language of the moment that says that we recognize the importance of data. And it's really interesting. You talk about the kind of transparency of private organizations like not being so trusted. It is the opposite here. The studies that we have show that actually people trust private organizations more with their data. They're more willing to say, yes, I will happily give all my personal information to that service because I really want that service. And I think that is a bit about the kind of setting the expectation. Like the government in Estonia has really set the expectation really high on transparency. And that's some of the problems we need to fix. So yes, we have a load of kind of systemic problems around how we share data and like how data, the value of data actually is realized. But actually we also have an opportunity to set the bar really high for all of those private organizations to increase the transparency that they have and to increase kind of public trust and use of data.
And Jenny, you say there's like more of a language now and an understanding of data. Just going back to what Ott said around how much has been invested into this area, do you think, because I've just come from a session on making the right investment decisions for innovation, do you think ministers understand the value of investing in good data management?
I think there's a difference between, so yes, managing data will mean that it's can be of the quality and that we can ensure that it's used and get the most value out of it. But actually, that's where we want to invest. Really, is like what are the outcomes that we can drive through data? And I think we, as data people, get really excited about like I can like build some tools and it will be like, really well managed and curated and beautiful, and my data quality is going to be amazing. But actually, I've not thought about, is it good enough for that amazing use case that could mean somebody gets their winter fuel allowance without having to fill in a load of forms. That just kind of automatically happens. So I think that's the investment that people are looking to make is like what are the outcomes from me investing in data that you can really kind of tangibly point to.
Thanks. So Fiona, moving on to the ONS, I mean, in many ways, data is everything that you do. So just your thoughts on, are people starting to understand the value of data more? But also, have you got any examples of where data's been used really effectively?
Yeah, I think we've understood the value of data for a long time. I mean, there's lots of different types of data, right? So you've got survey data, you've got administrative data, which is collected for government services primarily. You've got third party and big data, which can be more novel. But the power, they're all assets and they all tell us insights about people, about society, about businesses. And we can begin to think about different kind of data domains across the world in which we operate. And really the power of the data is in integrating that together. So, for example, we have been recently looking at, I'm very excited to be welcoming a number of analysts to Newport next week to investigate child poverty. So being able to bring together kind of employment data with energy information and people data, really trying to understand what kind of indicators and where the government might be able to support families and households and children avoiding kind of moving into poverty because of increasing fuel bills. Now that's a kind of critical mission for the government. It forms one of their missions. So really kind of exposing the value of that kind of integration is really important horizontally across government. Another area where we've been doing that is bringing together health data with economic data. So we've been looking at a number of different health interventions in terms of the impact of talking therapies, for example, the impact of musculoskeletal surgery, the impact of other kind of interventions for women, and the impact of those interventions on getting people back into work. So we've been looking specifically at earnings and then the interventions, and we can really see quite a clear relationship between some of those interventions and overall earnings. And that's really important for overall productivity and economic productivity. So we're really trying to expose that kind of integration value and unlock the power of all the different insights we can get from the different types of data that's collected.
So that's even before we get into, because we'll come on to kind of AI and what that means for data, but you're talking about the benefits of just sharing data and joining up data sets, the benefits you can get from doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that relies on it relies on government collaborating and working together on kind of that joint outcome, that clear societal benefit, which is in everybody's interest, really.
Yeah, thanks. So, Lee, I'm going to come to you with almost two hats on, I think. So one as the Chief Data Officer for CGI, but then also working with the public sector as well. So what is the value of data, and what's your view on how the public sector are doing? Kind of, are they doing well compared to the private sector, or where could they be doing better in terms of good data management?
So there's quite a lot in that question.
There is.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to wear two hats today. Yes, in terms of my CGI role, but also prior to joining CGI, I worked for central government for 20 years. So both as the Chief Data Officer for the National Crime Agency, so I have a law enforcement background, and prior to that, I pretty much grew up in HMRC and then the Home Office. So building investment cases actually for data and transformation programs, delivering them, and then obviously a handful of them I actually managed to close down and finish, which is really great. So what I've learned in my time, and also some of the work I'm doing now actually back in the Home Office actually for CGI and more broadly on other things we do, is I'll always say this, anybody that knows me, is that you always say in any organisation, whether it's public or private sector, your people are your most important asset. Do you know what's second in my view? Your data. And if you don't invest and look after your data the way that you look after your people, then you really do suffer the consequences for it in so many different ways. And I've seen it through a lot of the work I've done both in HMRC and actually latterly in law enforcement and now back obviously in the Home Office, that actually data can be so powerful when handled well, when you actually have the right foundations in place actually, and then when obviously you bring, and I've negotiated a number of those data sharing agreements, when you can bring data together, the power of that can have such societal benefits. So both in terms of actually building a better intelligence picture, so you can obviously prevent a lot of activities that we want to prevent. It can help with getting repayments back out to people when needed from a tax perspective. There's so many different aspects of it. Obviously, we've talked a lot of use cases already on this panel, but I cannot underestimate how much I think data is absolutely the second most important asset to any organisation. I think everybody in this room will probably recognise that. But you must invest in it and you must look after it and continuously improve it just as much as you do with how we look after our people as well.
Thanks. Thanks all for kind of setting the scene. I've got one immediate follow-up question, and then I'm going to come to the audience. So you've all mentioned like the benefits and if we can share data more effectively. We also talked about people and data. And I wonder whether some of the biggest barriers to data sharing are our people. So is there kind of a culture of wanting to protect your own data, or maybe not understanding, are you allowed to share certain types of data? What would that mean for security and privacy? And we have GDPR rules and all of those kind of things. Is that preventing people from sharing their data in a really effective way? I'm going to do one more this way and then I will mix it up a bit. But Barry, we haven't heard from you for a while.
It's a great question. When we had a change of government and I was chatting to our new minister, and he said something along the lines to me of, I suppose you're really frustrated with GDPR. And I said, absolutely not at all. I think it's a fantastic piece of legislation. I think it's very misinterpreted. And I think often people misinterpret it for passive-aggressive reasons. In other words, they don't want to share the data. Because the whole point of GDPR is to encourage the safe sharing of data. And if you follow the rules of purpose, specificity, transparency, and sunsetting, you're never going to have any problem with any legal authority in sharing data. So I think it is cultural. I think there was a very interesting question yesterday afternoon about, when you're talking about missions, which are generally cross-cutting in nature, does the existing setup of government become a barrier to that? And of course, the answer is yes, it is, but it's never going to change. So we've got to work out how to make it work in that context, and that is a challenge. We have several departments across government, and they're just a joy to work with, and we've done fantastic things with them. And others just move at a glacial pace, and it is extremely frustrating, and you often need political support and so on. But I think if we could get everybody on message, you know, whether we use the term mission or another compelling vision of a better future, where people realize they've got to do their bit to enable this to happen. So, you know, I was talking about the wallet earlier on. You can create a credential for anything, but it needs hard work in the department as well as in the centre. And sometimes they're up for that and they're brilliant, and so other times they're just not.
they're not. So it's about that innovative culture and having that culture.
Yeah.
Thanks. Ott, so do you come up against people who aren't able to, don't want to, not willing to share data?
So skills and competencies, it's one of the most critical aspects. So when I joined the government, it's not only government, kind of intergovernmental, how we educate, but also how we build kind of the foundational part in the nation as well. So we try to educate at least 10% of the whole central government each year. Similarly, one of our strategic objectives for 2030 is elementary data and AI skills in the population 80%.
Yeah.
That's a huge, it's going to be a huge challenge. But again, we've been working both on primary, secondary year school level, higher education, that we actually have kind of even the elementary level courses, programs available. I remember in 2018 when I joined, I had a discussion with our Minister of Education and Research. Told them, you know, we need to have a separate data science program. Their answer was, we don't believe in data science. And I was like, what do you mean you don't believe in data science? We believe this is not an area that the government should invest in.
Wow.
I made a decision, we invested ourselves. We created this program in one of our universities. It became popular instantaneously, attracting researchers from abroad to come back to Estonia as well, because the area was underfunded. Specific programs for data stewards and so forth. So when it comes to people, skills and competencies, it's oftentimes the barrier. But you can not only educate the experts, we have taken more of a competence matrix aspect. So it oftentimes kind of where the bottlehead really is the upper management executives who don't understand why we need to invest in.
Yeah.
And the same thing with ministers and others. So we need to educate across the board.
Yeah.
Legal experts, program managers, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, Art. And then I think I'm going to ask a similar question to Jenny and to Fiona, because you both have you sit in these central kind of bodies. How are you helping to make it easier for people to understand or provide them with tools so that they can share data and maybe understand how they can do it safely and securely?
We always talk about the current, what we call the culture of no. So there's a real kind of discussion around, like, how do we incentivize people to share their data? But actually, the things that people want to do is they want to do good things in the world, you know, within the public sector. People are very willing to share their data, but they're very scared. They don't understand the risks. They don't understand whether it's okay for them to do it. And they generally, normally have a lack of understanding of, like, what are all the things I should do in order to kind of check that. And so we talk about instead, like, if we remove all the disincentives, like, will we, you know, create that kind of culture of yes, or yes, but we need to put these things in place for ethical, lawful sharing. So a big part of what we're doing at the moment is creating what we call a kind of trust framework. And so that is just really trying to set out what are the really practical things that people need to do to understand. How can we ensure people know what all of the things are they need to do from a GDPR perspective? And how can we make that really useful and usable? So we're really trying to create some, like, useful things, but we also recognize there are some legal barriers. There are some genuine places at the moment we kind of can't share information. And part of our team is also looking at the legislation of things like the Digital Economy Act and adding new powers to that so that there are some very specific things that we can do. So at the moment, adding new powers in order that Ofgem can share information about who should have the fuel allowance and how does that information then kind of flow to the right people.
Thanks, Jenny. And Fiona, the ONS are doing something. You've got initiatives going on as well in this space, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jenny set it out quite nicely in terms of we've put in, well, government generally has put in place some very kind of complex structures and processes which add delay to the way in which we handle data. But the safeguards are there in many places for very good reasons, for security reasons, for example, for privacy reasons. And people do, I think, recognise that when we talk about trust in data, trust will be dependent on someone's sex, someone's age, someone's, like, even where they live, where they're living in the country. It's a kind of value proposition, whereas we like to talk about trustworthiness. So trustworthiness in an organisation, trustworthiness in continuing to demonstrate that as an organisation you can handle the data, you do that in a secure way. And there is more to do, I think, in terms of partly to the kind of literacy point that was being made earlier, but in terms of understanding what those safeguards are and how we keep data secure, there does tend to be less kind of fluency in some of these terms around anonymity, pseudonymization, hashing, de-identification. People generally, the general public, they don't really know what all the different methods are. So there's a kind of there's a bit of a kind of language barrier between technical and kind of policy, which we will continue to kind of support breaking down. We've been doing a Bringing Data to Life campaign publicly recently, which has been going very well. And I'd encourage anyone to look at that on our website. There's lots of different kind of sessions, and we're trying to explain what data means to individuals. And we also work closely with schools. We've done a BBC microbit campaign, trying to get kind of primary schools engaged in data. So we're doing lots of things like that. But I think there is a cultural tendency to be more risk averse, and I think particularly the data ownership model can be really unhelpful if we want to do things quickly. So alongside looking at legislative change, we should look at how we can speed things up while ensuring we've got the kind of safeguards in place we need for very kind of sensitive linkage.
Can I just add as well?
Yeah.
You mentioned about kind of senior leaders as well. I have a massive plug for the kind of senior leaders data training that ONS were kind of providing. That had a massive impact in the organisations we've worked.
Yeah.
And it has it isn't about teaching them kind of necessarily data skills, but it's how do you talk to data people?
Yeah. I'm collecting a list of things that have come out of innovation in terms of all the things our senior leaders need to go on training for. So it's going to be a weekend retreat, I think, by the end of this. So I'm going to ask Lee finally the same question around culture, then I'm coming to you in the audience just to give you a heads up. But Lee, what I'm really interested in, because you've sat in the public sector and the private sector, done time in both, is that cultural kind of approach to data different? Have you found that different?
No, in some respects, actually. So it's interesting. Just listening to everybody's feedback on it. So I kind of have a perspective from, I used to own one part of the Data Protection Act for law enforcement. That was my Home Office role. And when we were going through Brexit, so that was quite complicated and all the stuff we had to do around that. But then interestingly, actually then doing that advisory piece back out to law enforcement. And then I've obviously then worked in law enforcement where we then had to obviously operate practically in that scenario. And now I'm doing more, obviously, advisory work back in again. It's really interesting when you look at what you hear on the front line, actually in people's perspective, and I would agree, I think there's a lot of risk aversion out there. Mainly from, in some respects, just a lack of understanding about what is possible actually under that framework. I think the safeguards we've got in place across the UK are there for a reason, and actually it's a good thing actually and drives the right behaviours back to my earlier point about making sure we do the right investments and handling and data management around our data. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be able to do that kind of integration piece, that sharing. And it is possible, actually. And when you go out and look at those things and do some of that work, where it gets hard, I think, sometimes for people is when you're trying to work out if you've got the right master data. And that's where you start to get some of the complexity of the systems and some of the kind of technical debt we've got in some of the applications we're using across government and the ones that we work with, obviously, in my current capacity, and actually getting to the nub of what's actually where that data's flowing to, how it's being used, and then how can we share it and make sure it's the right source, all those kind of questions that you'd normally practically go through. I think the other thing I would say is I've done a number of data literacy programs, both in my old world and then in my new world. And actually, in some respects, sometimes you have to target this stuff because it all depends on the audience you're actually trying to educate and where they're coming from in terms of skill set. There's a completely different set of stuff you would train information asset owners on who have never really dealt with data before, but they're running these assets and they need to understand all the different aspects. The risk facets of things they've got to obviously invest in, improve, all that sort of stuff, and how to go about it, right down to a data scientist and how you'd obviously educate them around some of those things to, you know, an operational officer out there in the field that really just needs to understand how it's going to practically benefit them, actually, and understanding what their responsibilities are. And when you tailor some of these things, God, the reaction engagement you get is amazing, actually. And pennies drop and people go, wow, is that possible? Yes, if you do these things, this is all that it takes to actually do some of that stuff. Don't get me wrong, there's still lots of complexity in it. There's still lots that needs to be improved on all fronts, actually. But, you know, the more we educate and grow that literacy across all the different levels, the more we'll be able to improve this kind of situation. And all of that is very much linked to about, I think, where you're about to go in terms of if we want to use things like AI, and I've done robotics, I've done other implementations, you have to have all these foundational elements, including the literacy side. We call it literacy, but basically it's just helping people to understand what their responsibilities are and how they can work with the possibilities and opportunities of the data they handle and also safeguard it effectively. That's when then you can start to transform it. I think the other thing I would say from living on both sides of the fence is don't try and boil the ocean. That's always where it goes wrong, if you try to go too big. Focus on the use case of what you're trying to actually go after. And start with, sometimes it's what's your organizational strategy, and boil it down then to what is that key problem you're trying to solve. And if you focus around the use case of what you're trying to achieve and what that means, you can then grow it from there. And actually you'll find that you'll achieve more by breaking it down in that way than trying to do some big transformation program of all your data. It just never works in my experience, because there are so many different changes that happen over the time period of those things that you either lose the sponsorship or you lose your money or there's prioritization or something else happens. So if you break it down into the, not silos, it's the wrong word, but the use cases you're going after, you actually achieve far more in my experience.
Yeah, and sometimes there's so much data out there, it can be a bit overwhelming. And where do you find the insights and all of that data?
Absolutely.
Oh, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just wanted to highlight the same thing, that what we have seen the most successful are really targeted interventions. So either during the COVID, we addressed PR. So how are you able to use AI-related tools for sentiment, customer contact analysis, really specific focus? Or the same thing in the private sector. How SMEs, micro companies can utilize AI for marketing purposes. And we see that those really particular use cases, whether it is in open data, data governance, AI, they oftentimes have the best outcome. I'm just going to give you an example that, in my opinion, didn't work really well. So just for the context, we have roughly 26,000 people in the central government. We educated 1,500 in a 10-day course on data analytics using R. So 6 months, 12 months afterwards, we did a kind of a survey. Have you had a chance to put the skills in practice in use? The outcome wasn't really positive. Mostly, it was brought out, again, the same thing that I mentioned previously about the executive support. The current work processes don't allow analytical work. Oftentimes, the executive demands answers in basically the same day, and they don't have time. And this, again, boils down to how we make decisions, how we make regulations. You don't oftentimes have time. You need to deliver today, and the executive level actually don't know what goes into it. So it was, in my opinion, too broad, and it didn't really deliver the value.
And that's a real challenge for civil servants, I think, is how do you feed that need for very quick results with doing the real deep kind of evidence-based analytics and research. So, yeah, a real challenge. OK, I'm coming over to the audience. Who would like to put the first? Yes, we have a hand up here. If we have thank you. Do we have a second one so we can get the mic over to you afterwards? Be thinking about your second question. Yeah, right close. That's lucky. There we go.
Hi, I'm Steph. I work at the ONS. And this conversation is really interesting to me because the whole stuff around legal frameworks for sharing data and the culture that exists around data sharing across government is very relevant to my team's area. I'm in the IDS strategy team. But I think my question is, picking up on something that Jenny said around, we have some evidence that maybe the public has more of an expectation that we'll be sharing their data than is reflected in practice. Is there maybe more that we could be doing to have conversations with data owners along the lines of you have very understandable concerns and very important and real concerns around risk, around public acceptability of data sharing, but we have this evidence that maybe the public is expecting this to happen, and we have those really compelling use cases where sharing data across government and linking data leads to really impactful research.
So I'm just going to repeat that question because I'm not sure everyone can hear that question, but it's, in summary, I'm going to say, based on something Jenny said about the public probably assume we're sharing more of their data than we are and sharing it in ways that we're not telling them about. Are there conversations we could be had, better conversations we could be had with data owners about maybe how they could communicate more about the benefits of sharing that data in light of the fact that the public are assuming that they're doing it anyway? Yeah, so how can we enable all of those? So, yes, I'm going to come to you.
So what we have done is, from one end, we provide data owners, when we talk about individuals, overview of how we are actually processing, exchanging data between government to business. We call the service data tracker. And the second part is consent service, so giving individuals the right to decide who, for what reason, can access their government-held data. I remember when I started to introduce both of the ideas, the government was extremely skeptical. When it comes to data tracker, some of them still are. But the government last year, after months of work, and Minister of Interior Security was one of the most strongly opposed, we passed that it's going to be mandatory for the whole of government. And the same thing with data consent service. Just to give you an example, if you want to get a loan from a financial institution, you can give a consent, you can access my salary, employment information, and you get a reply, approved, not approved, the terms in 3 minutes. So, or the same thing in healthcare. If you want to give a doctor that otherwise is not your personal GP access to your health records, you are in control, and you can take back your consent any time. So within a year, we had over 1 million people that used consent service. At its peak week, we have 1/3 of Estonian population, roughly 450,000 people that use data tracker. So this is maybe not answering the question directly, but I truly believe that we need to give kind of people the right tools, but then also the skills that you are now in control. And the biggest opposers are actually bringing out that the government should decide for people, because the data literacy is so low that they don't have enough knowledge to decide who, for what reason, what potential challenges, impact it could have. So I remember the first thing, I'm just going to end in a second, was now imagine someone sharing their genome data to, the oftentimes was Amazon for $10 voucher. And I was like, really, Amazon, $10 voucher for your genome data? But this was kind of the discussion that back then we had. And as a result, right now, on the government level, we have the AI leap, educating everyone in these schools about the AI impact. Similarly, right now, we plan to start teaching about data privacy, data protection from elementary school level on. So We understand we need to educate people, but we have the tools already in place.
And so that's a really transparent system that you're kind of describing there. Fiona, you wanted to come in and then...
Yeah,
Mary.
I think the issue of consent in the UK is quite complex, so it's not as simple. It works very well in health, and there's been I've seen some fantastic innovation in the NHS regarding consent-based, kind of data-driven decision-making around, for example, developing a Lynch registry and early identification of cancer. Some fantastic examples there. I guess we are relatively lucky in the statistics world in that we do have quite a lot of legislative cover to bring data together, which other organisations don't necessarily have. So even where consent has been removed, we are still empowered to use the data in the interests of the public good. So that, I think, is very useful, but we've always worked on a kind of value exchange basis. So we've never ever kind of pushed any kind of mandatory data collection, for example, in order to drive at a particular outcome. I think, to your question, it relates to what Jenny was touching on earlier around incentives and disincentives across the system. And really, we need to find a way of shifting the accountability from the data owner to the kind of output, to the department that's publishing the analysis or the output. And that works well for us, for ONS, because it's published in our name, and therefore we have the reputational impact if it's not particularly good. For example, if it's poor data quality, it's not sitting with the data provider in that instance. So I think that kind of, if we can find a way of shifting that or providing a different incentive, I think that would really help open up conversations with data owners. But I also think some of the processes we've put in place around data owner approvals are probably a little bit too burdensome at the moment, so we can look to streamline that.
Barry, very quickly, because I know we've got another question.
I think you're on the right lines. Don't do it on a general basis. Be very purposeful. So find an existing problem that you want to resolve. Get passionate about it. For example, why, if a woman gives birth to a baby today, does she have to apply for a benefit next week? So you basically say, we need to share birth information with the welfare department. We need to be proactive in paying benefits. That way, anybody who says no, they're a clear barrier to change, and they're actually a barrier to providing a good public service. So you find problems and you go that way. And people tend actually to be much easier talked around if they know they're fixing a problem rather than a general request to share data.
Can I add one more on the end,
Yeah.
which is really short, which is actually what we hear a lot from people is, like, we would love to just be told what to do sometimes, because you're asking us to negotiate all these really complicated things where actually the end benefit is great, but like I've got all the risk. So that I think there is a place for sometimes, like, yeah, we just need to take that away and just say, yep, you're going to have to do this.
Can I add one final thing? Sorry.
Yeah, and then I want to get into
be
questions.
a soundbite. Half the time it's understanding where someone else in government has done it, and it's learning from that actually, and how they've managed to do it in the way they've done it in the process and accelerated, streamlined it actually. Just sometimes it's the power of the network actually, and things like events like this actually, and finding someone who's done what you're after. I completely agree that I think educating data owners on some of those things so they realise actually they can go, oh, if it's done before, then I don't feel so risked about it, but I just need to go through those steps and then I'll get there. That's my last thing I was just going to say.
So we've got two questions. I'm going to ask you to ask both questions, then you can answer one or both, and we've got just over 5 minutes left.
Amazing. Hi everyone, Antonia from the Government Digital Service on a bit of an ideas gathering mission. I wanted to hear from the panel members, what is one new data experiment or project or outcome that you've heard about or spoken to people about that you're really excited to see happen?
So one new data initiative you're excited about, especially to the UK people. And then this question here.
Hi, Ellie Swinglehurst from Worldwide Technology. So my question primarily is around, there's an estimation that we only have 2 years worth of real-world data left that we're training AI models on. So what is the risk to public sector and real life people if we move away from real world data onto synthetic data?
Great that we got in a question about AI. So the impact of AI really and using real data as opposed to synthetic data. I'm going to start that way. You've all got 30 seconds. You can answer one or both of those questions. AI in 30 seconds. There we go.
Oh, I thought it was both questions.
No, you can do either.
I'm going to do both. So most exciting thing, for years I've had a pet project that I've wanted to do when I was on the other side. I'm trying to do it this side, but influencing in, where we create a common government gateway. So there are common data sets that I know, having worked in so many departments, that we're all using and all taking the same cuts of the same data. Why aren't we just doing it once? There's no reason why you can't have an enterprise agreement around some of those data sets and put through the right controls in a gateway. I understand CDDO, but subject to what's going on at the moment and moving to DCIT, are looking into that. Isn't that exciting? It would be amazing. Secondly, on AI, that's really interesting, isn't it? I think that comes down to we've got to walk before we run, is probably what I would say in a really quick thing. And that comes back to, I know I keep saying it, but it's so important, being really clear about your data foundations and understanding where your source data is coming from, and that you put the right validation and the human in the loop involved in that. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but I've only got 30 seconds, so I'm going to run with that. But I agree. I think that just comes down to there are brilliant use cases with AI, but we've got to walk before we run sometimes with those things.
Fab. And just say, I know I'm being very unhelpful giving you
No,
only
it's
30
fine.
seconds, but if you feel like your question doesn't get answered fully, ask it again in the last
Come grab me
session.
after.
All right? Fiona.
Yep, so a big idea is around what we call index data, which is providing a scalable way of linking data together, and it's really capitalizing on that kind of use and reuse value. So we can use it over and over again. And on AI, yeah, I mean, I think direct data collection is going to continue to be important to give us new insights and new data. I can't see that falling by that. So you can have as much synthetic data as you want, but you need to have control on some of the data you're collecting, and that's going to continue to give you something new.
Jenny.
Biggest thing on my list at the moment is National Data Library. So that's something within the kind of GDS data team we're supporting with. I'm most excited about that, the kind of core services that we're looking at building that Antonia is going to be taking forward. And in terms of the kind of use of AI, there are two things which are totally not your question, but I think are like really interesting from that point. Like we talk about like AI using data right now. We forget that there was a whole load of history before that. Like you look at the talking about government, ask a LLM about government, it knows government right now. I can tell you it didn't look like that 6 months ago. And so like how do we like get all of that information as well so that it understands like what point in time we're actually asking so that we can answer all of those previous questions. And in terms of synthetic data, I do think that there is a massive opportunity with synthetic data because you've got so many big questions that you can start to look at. My favorite one at the moment is the work that Octopus Energy are doing on totally synthetic data of all smart meters and energy usage across the whole sector. They have really good coverage, but actually they don't have everybody. So they're starting to look at how do I kind of fill in those gaps, and then it becomes a less personal data set.
Thanks. Oh.
So most excited about the citizen digital twin that we are working on. So giving people more control over the data they have, extending what I mentioned previously, and this boils down to personalized services in terms of the benefits and everything else. So the key part is basically an agent throughout in each specific life. You want to live healthy, you have an agent, and the list goes on. And coming back to the synthetic data part, this is actually one of the from a privacy-enhancing technology perspective, a key aspect that we've been working on. I'm actually really excited about the project that the team is right now working on. It's making the whole public sector salary data available as a synthetic data. We previously have done a couple of synthetic data projects as well, but if that goes well, we plan to apply it for the whole of Estonia. So full transparency on salary, your previous work experience, and the list goes on.
Thanks. Final word.
I'll connect the two together. What I'm most excited about is that through digital wallets, we can involve people in the management of their own data. And actually how you scale that up and we did a little bit of this during COVID with our contact tracing app. We learned people are really up for engaging with government where there's a societal benefit. So imagine if you could ask people when they go for a cholesterol test and a blood pressure test, put that data in and allow Fiona or our equivalents in Ireland to take that data in at mass, use AI with it, and start to develop real accurate profiles about the health of the community in UK and Ireland using AI. Incredibly exciting opportunity of using crowdsourcing, getting current data off people and playing it back to them and appropriate advice. So we can keep on creating even more current data and more powerful data as we go forward. That really excites me.
Fantastic. And I think this has gone off.
We're all off.
They were obviously telling us it's time to
Yeah,
go.
cutting us off.
We've been cancelled. Nope. Hello?
I think we've
This would be a great time to have a power cut, wouldn't it, in the whole of these? And just to say we're at the end, I'm sure you can all join me in a very warm round of applause to our fantastic...
That's one way to end a panel. Brilliant.
Yeah.
You now have the final coffee break of innovation, but please do stay around because at 4...
Thank you.
Awesome.
At
It's all
4
going
o'clock,
peak
we
Tom.
have a brilliant final session where we've got speakers from Ukraine, from Iceland, and we have the head of the GDS, Chris Bellamy, coming back, and we're really going to wrap everything up. So we'll see you back in the main room. Everybody's in plenary.
Oh, that's awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
She got everybody to turn their phones on.